Counselor Abeyta,
Yes.
Counselor Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Vihel-Coppler,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
and Chairman Rivera.
Yes. Approve of the consent
Motion passes.
agenda. Thank you, Ms. Diaz. Approve of the consent agenda. Any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Anything committee members would like to pull? Councilor Garcia.
I'd like to pull item A as in alpha and F as in Frank.
All right, Councilor Vihel-Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My item was pulled.
Anybody else? See none. So we have items A and F that have been pulled. Anything else? Very good. Could we have a roll call vote, please? Or could we have a motion for approval of the consent agenda as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
Motion for approval by Councilor Vihel-Coppler, second by Councilor Abeyta. Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please, Ms. Diaz.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Abeyta,
Yes.
Counselor Vihel-Coppler,
Yes.
and Chairman Rivera.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Approval of the minutes from May 11th, 2021. Any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Anything from the committee? Wishes of the
Move to
committee?
approve the minutes.
Second.
Motion for approval by Councilor Garcia, second by Councilor Vihel-Coppler. Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please, Ms. Diaz.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Abeyta,
Yes.
Counselor Vihel-Coppler,
Yes.
and Chairman Rivera.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment this afternoon, Ms. Diaz?
Mr. Chair, there is no public comment.
Thank you. We're on the presentation informational items. Public Utilities Department annual update to 5-year financial plan. Mr. Jones.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your time tonight. We're here before you with an update. The Public Utilities Department does contract with a third-party financial group, FCS Group. Our representative is Jason Mum, who has a lot of history with the utility. They gather annual information, plug into their models to monitor for the utility cash balances, expenditures, capital improvement plans, and those analysis reflect any changes or impacts to our rate structure and how that looks. Jason Mum and his team also provide other financial services model analysis for questions that come up through the year. But it is our intent that once a year we update the 5-year financial plan that looks at that, kind of looks at the health of the utilities. Jason Mum is here tonight with his presentation to go over that update, and we are available for any questions. So if it pleases the chair, I would like to turn it over to Jason Mum for the presentation.
Thank you, Jason. Do you need us to share comment or share content or?
The screen is shared, Councilor.
Okay.
Bear.
Awesome, thank you.
Oops.
I'm sorry, it's asking me to do some permissions here. Hang on. Sorry, this is a new new hiccup for me. It seems like I had worked them all through, but no.
Does Shannon have your presentation, or can you send it to him?
Yeah, Shannon, maybe it might be better if you just share it and we can walk through it.
Okay, I do have the presentation, and with Mr. Joel Beto's permission, I can share my screen.
Sir, you don't need my permission. You can share the screen if you'd like. Let me know if you need a little bit of help, brother. I'm here too to help out.
Shannon, I think I got it going here if you want.
Okay, proceed. I'll still work to get it opened up on my computer.
I think I've got it shared if everyone can see it.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. My apologies for the delay here. So as Shannon said, my name is Jason Munn. I have been working with the city of Santa Fe for a good number of years now, really since about 1999, actually, working on the rates and charges for the utilities during that time. And what we have done for most of that time is to prepare an annual update to the 5-year financial outlook for each of the 3 utility divisions. And in alternating years, we perform a cost of service rate study for each of the utilities. What that means is we take a harder look at one utility at a time from year to year as to how the costs of service look like, and then what that means specifically for the utility rates themselves, the rate structures. I'm going to come back to that cost of service a little bit later, because in this year, we were looking at the cost of service for the Environmental Service Division, and there's some findings there that we won't be able to share tonight, but some of the building blocks we do need to share tonight. So with that in mind, we'll walk through tonight first with the Water Division, and then we'll go to the Wastewater Division, and then finally to the Environmental Service Division. These forecasts that we're looking at are sort of big picture items. They are an opportunity for us to take an evaluation of the operating costs, the capital projects, the debt services, and some of the financial policies and targets that the city has set for the utility enterprises. These being generally the costs of operating the system, running it and owning it. And then on the other side, on the sources, we have cash reserves, different kinds of financing, whether it's bonds or state loans, sometimes grants, and user charges, which is one of the key reasons why we're looking at these from year to year. So we are looking at all of the actual spending, all the policy goals, all the debt service. It's extremely comprehensive. But the objective here is to give us a 5-year look ahead of what's coming down the road for each of these utilities. It's our chance to evaluate whether our forecast has any shortfalls and to recommend solutions that'll produce the lowest impact on the user rates. And then, of course, once we've got that figured out, or at least we think we do, we report our findings to the city. And normally we have a conversation similar to what we're having tonight. Don't believe that happened last year, thanks to a host of reasons that we don't need to go into tonight, pandemic. But without further ado, let's talk about water. So the Water Division. But since the last time I was here talking with council, we have had some changes. And just to kind of start off, I want to talk about 3 scenarios that we looked at for the Water Division. We're going to talk more about the third of these scenarios, with the one we're calling the minimized user rate impact, which is aptly named because one of the biggest reasons why we do this 5-year evaluation each year is to work very hard at making sure that whatever changes are coming up, we anticipate them and we address them at the least possible impact to the users, to the customers. So we want the bill impacts to be as low as we can possibly make them. So each of these is attempting to do that. It's just that each one of these, we've got some different ingredients going into them. I'll start with first one. We're going to call scenario 1 the cash funded approach. In this scenario, we would fund the entire CIP with cash from the earnings we generate only from the water utility. No borrowing, et cetera. It maintains all of our current reserve targets in it. And we're going to talk more about this franchise fee a little bit later, but this particular scenario does not pass on the franchise fee expense to customers. So why don't I talk a little bit about the franchise fee right now, because we're going to hit it 3 times here before we go too much further. So the franchise fee was a cost imposed on the water utility roughly in 2016, I want to say, meant to be 4% of the operating revenue of the utility. And the franchise fee is functions a lot like a payment in lieu of tax. It's money that's meant to go back to the city to pay for different things that the city provides for the utility. What was intended at the time was that the franchise fee would be offset with a corresponding charge on customers' bills. In other words, if I had a bill for $100, I would have a franchise fee on top of that of 4%, so $4. And then that $4 would be passed on directly to the city. But the way it was actually implemented was that 4% bill addition never got added. So what's been going on since is the utility, the water division, has been absorbing that cost. It's a line item in the budget for the water division, and it's paid, but there was no addition to the bills at that time. So when we say it does not pass on the utility franchise fee, it means status quo. The utility's rates cover the franchise fee, and there's no addition to the bill. So we, the other things that are germane to this scenario is we're funding $105.9 million in capital improvements with the earnings only coming from the water division. We're taking on $0 in debt proceeds, and the target cash reserve, you'll see this number a lot tonight too, 365 days. That means that the water division at a minimum needs to hold on to 365 days a year of its operating expenses as a reserve. And that number was set also in 2016 timeframe because both the franchise fee and this target were set at the same time. And it happened to correspond with another event that took place back then, which was the water division once was the recipient of GRT proceeds from the city. And in 2016, those proceeds were reappropriated elsewhere. And so some of these other provisions came into play at that time. The second scenario does some of the same things. What we're going to do here is we are going to pass on the utilities franchise fee, and we're going to work with an assumption, and I'm going to circle that word assumption, that we might be able to reduce the cash reserve target from 365 to 180 days. More on that later. And then in the third scenario, we're doing the same thing as in the second, but we're also taking on some additional debt to pay for the capital improvements. And it's that third scenario that's going to produce the lowest possible impact on the users. I talked a little bit about these things already. The 365-day cash reserve policy, that's about 5 years old at this point. Wanted to talk a little bit about it because this number wasn't just invented out of the air. It came from the city's municipal advisors, First Southwest, and it was done as a means of enhancing the credit viability for the water division. And that was thought to be necessary at the time because when the city reappropriated those GRT proceeds, it was about $7 or $8 million a year in revenue. Your advisors believed that it would be helpful if we held on to additional cash as a means of supporting and maintaining the AAA credit rating of the water division. And so that target's been in place ever since. And so what we're asking tonight is does it still need to be in place? And I think it's a worthwhile question to ask, because as you'll see in the next few slides, if we reduce it, what it means is we have that much more money to put towards capital projects, not just held in a bank account. And that means we don't have to come up with those funds in either debt or in terms of revenue from rates. So it's a way to use some existing cash to help absorb some of the burdens that we see coming down the line. So some of the hurdles for that, and this is why we really want to have consensus from finance and from First Southwest, is there is a possibility that could lower the credit rating of the water division. That's not necessarily something that we would like to cause by doing this, but at the same time, at least from our perspective, we've seen those required reserve levels coming down with respect to all of our other clients in the country, and so we raised the question here. A little bit on the franchise fee pass through. This again was put at 4% back in 2016. Like I said, it was originally programmed to be a pass through to customers, but that 4% payment in lieu of tax, if you want to call it that, was never implemented. So the rates from the utility absorb that cost. So if we change it and we go ahead and say, well, let's make sure we match that to a charge, it's going to have the same effect as a 4% rate increase, at least for 1 year in which we do it. And I'll show you that here coming right up. And we look at impacts of these recommendations, and that first one is in this first grouping of bars over here. So this is the cash funded scenario number one. We take care of everything with our earnings. We don't get any debt. We don't change the franchise fee. We don't do any of that. And what we can see is we have some pretty hefty increases that we would need to put in place to take care of all of those expenditures. We're not recommending this. The cash funded approach with adjustments means that we're going to at least do a pass through with that franchise fee. So what you see there is in FY 23-24, we've got this dark blue bar here that represents the 4% that we would need to add to the bills, to the rates essentially, in order to recover the franchise fee. So with that and with the other increases that we would need at that time, we would be spiking about a 9.25% increase in that 1 year. But otherwise, it's about 5.25% over the course of that 4-year period there. In the minimized impact scenario, the one we're going to talk about most tonight, we would need to do that 4% for that 1 year, but otherwise, we really don't need to do anything. So you can kind of see how this one is more of the preferred approach. It is the one that represents the least amount of impact to the ratepayers. We like to do this little chart just to give you a sense of what's changed in the past year. This really shows a 6-year, because even though we call it a 5-year forecast, it's really looking at 6 years because of the current year plus 5. So this is meant to account for big changes, big picture items that really kind of moved the dial. So the capital improvements plan increased this year based on as compared to the last year's forecast, and we added about $19 million in capital projects from 1 year to the next. So if we change the target reserves, and we're kind of assuming that because we're talking about the minimized impact scenario at this point, this would reduce our needs by about 14 million over that 6-year period. And if we're able to recover the franchise fee like we're proposing here, that would also reduce the needs from last year by 4.4 million. And the COVID impact to rate revenues, we've done a lot of work on COVID expectations this year, and we believe that increased cost over a 6-year period by 2.5 million. So it's in the neighborhood of $500,000 per year that we think we're going to see there. I'll get into a couple of details. I won't spend a whole lot of time on these, but I always like to show, what it is you're looking at now versus what we showed you last time. So this is a chart that shows for the minimized impact scenarios, in other words, scenario number 3, the operating costs. This is just the operating and maintenance costs. And we're just showing you how the projection has changed from one year to the next. The dark bars are last year's work and the lighter bars are this year's work. You can see that those are all reduced from previous years. The biggest reason for this, there were a lot of little reasons, but the biggest reason is the way that we are now accounting for vacancies with the water division. We changed that a little bit. We did have an aspirational forecast, meaning that what we did was we took the vacancies and we made the assumption that the division would fill all those vacancies. And then of course that drove costs. And what we found over time was that as the vacancies were filled, we created yet more vacancies after that with normal turnover. And so what we've tried to do now is to normalize the vacancies for that level of normal turnover. And that changed our forecast and lowered it. The capital projects, this is meant to show you sort of a versus B comparison. Over here on the left side in the dark bars, these were the annual capital improvement expenditures that we had predicted last year. So the big number was 23.3 million in 2020, 2021. And what you see now is 2020, 21 was far less. Again, lots of things changed in that fiscal year. And going forward, we actually have more dollars in the plan now than we did last year. Some of the bars that you see over here have been broken up just to give you a sense of some of the big ticket items that are in the CIP. So this light green area here, we're calling that other. That's actually a combination of multiple smaller projects. This pink color here, this is the Nichols Conduit project, which is scheduled to take place over these 2 years, FY22 and 23. Flocculation and sedimentation project at the Canyon Road facility. That's in this sort of bluish color here. And then we've got the McClure Conduit and the San Juan Chama reuse or return flow pipeline. This return flow pipeline being a major capital project sits out there in FY22, 24, 25. And I'm sure that staff can give you a lot more information about these projects if you would like to know. Water division outstanding debt. So because we're changing the path of the proceeds, these are suggested debt proceeds to finance the capital improvements that the division wants to accomplish. This is a little bit different from last year. We did have some debt coming into place. We had a different schedule on it. And so what you see now is that the issuance of debt is deferred till about 23 and 24, where it pops up. And then we start paying it down at that point. What that leads to is a difference in our debt service obligations. So the debt is one thing, but the debt service obligations are the expenditures, the annual expenditures that we need to make with our rates. And you can see that follows the same path. We had about $3.3 million going into this through 22, 23, and then it jumps back up here to about 5.5 million. Last year it was a little bit higher sooner because we had projected the needs to occur on a different schedule, like I mentioned. Debt service coverage, this is a major policy target that we always track. And what we've established over a long time frame is that we want to make sure we hit a minimum target of about 1.5 times. Now, what debt service coverage is it's a measure of how much revenue you're earning above and beyond your operating expenses. And that ratio then is called your debt service coverage ratio. So if we took my all of my revenues and I subtract out my operating expenses and then divide that by the debt service for the year, I get this ratio. Now, 1.5 has been used for many years as just a go by for us. It's a good target. The minimum that's required based on your bond covenants is 1.25 times, so quite a bit lower than that. And, where this is one of the more important ratios that the credit rating agencies and financial markets want to look at as they evaluate the creditworthiness of the bonds that they have. Your coverage is very, very good. Up here in the 3s, that's up in the stratosphere. Down here at 1.7 to 2, that's a very, very, very good range for debt service coverage. And you've been able to maintain great coverage for a long time, which is one of the reasons why your bonds are AAA rated. Can't go any higher. Fund balance is another major thing that we're looking at. I mentioned this 365-day target before. That's this red line here. And it sits there at about $25 million. So that's money that really we program to just sit in your bank account and not be used, so that we could have that on hand, just like the target suggests. You see it coming down here, and that's because in this scenario, we have asked the question of could we lower it to 180 days? And I mentioned before, we really want to get concurrence there from finance and your financial advisors before we ever did something like this. But freeing up that money so that we can use it on things like the capital improvements does prevent us from having to go and ask for the money from the ratepayers. So this is part of the strategy of producing the lowest possible impact we can on the ratepayers. Now, these show the fund balance. This was last year's projection in the dark bars. The green ones are this year's projection. And the plan is, as it always is to use these resources to put it back into the system and draw that fund balance down towards the target. Right now, we're well above it. Really in every forecast we look at. But the plan here, at least, is to make sure that we do draw that down. And lastly, on the charts here, we're going to show the revenue requirement. Now, to think of the revenue requirement is to think of how much money do we have to earn from our rates in order to pay for all these things. And those things are broken up into just really a couple of categories, really. We have the operating and maintenance expenses that we talked about. We have the annual debt service requirements that we also talked about. We also have cash financed capital improvements, which is part of the capital costs that we pay every year. And we have the pluses and minuses that go on in the fund balance from year to year. And we use that plus and minus in the fund balance to try to help modulate or moderate these rates and charges over time. So what we're trying to do is to get to a point where we don't see any big sudden movements in these bars, and we really don't in this scenario because of what we're trying to accomplish with the lowest possible impact. For this year's forecast, what we did differently from last year's was we broke this up into a couple of pieces for you because we wanted to draw a little bit of attention to some of those categories. So at the bottom here, this pink area here, this is hundreds of line items from your operating budget all put together. This is what I might call the core operating and maintenance expenses. And you can see how that is projected to increase slightly from year to year. That's normal with inflation and so forth. That's what we're expecting to see there anyway. This sort of bright blue area here, that is the cost of the franchise fee out of the total there. And then this gold area here, this is a line item in your operating budget that is the cost of other city services to the water division. So this is between this gold piece and this bright blue one. This is all money that flows back to the general fund. One's to pay specifically for services That's the gold area. The blue one is the franchise fee, which just goes back to the general fund. So between those two things, that, it's roughly just under $5 million between the two. And, that's what those are. This green part here, this is the cash needs for the capital projects. And what that is in total is the debt service, and it's whatever portion of the capital projects we're paying for with cash from our earnings. So it really what this gives us is a pretty even, very measured approach towards meeting the revenue requirements. But we should then double back here and talk a little bit about some of the findings and what the implications are. So first of all, it's the increase in the capital improvements plan that is putting the pressure on the cash reserves. So we had to come up with an additional 20-some million dollars in the course of four or 5 years there to pay for new projects that are now on the capital improvements plan. Some of the actions that we're suggesting that we evaluate and try to implement in order to produce the lowest possible impact we can on ratepayers is, one, reducing that targeted cash reserve from 365 days to 180. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is that we have concurrence on this before it's done. Now, we've assumed it here tonight so that we can show you what that would look like, but this needs to be considered by others before it's put into place. Passing the franchise fee on to customers. This hasn't been done before, although that was the intent. It just didn't happen. And that doing that will have the same effect as seeming like a 4% rate increase to all of the customers, whether it's for the franchise fee or for some other thing. It really doesn't matter to them. They'll see a 4% increase in their bill. And, that will be the downside of that particular recommendation. And then securing some debt financing for the San Juan Trauma pipeline. We are suggesting that the city go out and try to bond for all of that. That's about $25 million in proceeds, construction proceeds. Well, we did assume a little bit in there for issuance costs and some other costs of issuance, but your financial advisors will be able to give you a better number when the time comes on that too. 25 million. Okay, I'm going to move to wastewater next, but before I do, I thought maybe I would pause and ask to see if there's any burning questions on the water division.
Thank you, Jason. Any questions regarding water?
I got a question, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And for water, you mentioned there was a COVID impact to revenues, roughly about 2.5 million. Are we looking at potentially getting the reimbursed for those losses through ARP funds?
So it was 2.5 million over 6 years.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know the answer to your second question. I'm sorry.
That's fine, Jason. Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, we are working with the finance department. We do know that there are programs that can help our customers with some of their outstanding debt, working on payment plans. But even for really now, probably the past 14 months, we've been working with finance to really understand what the impact that the pandemic is having on revenues. So we continue to monitor that. So we were very diligent when this number was included in our financial plan that we worked with the finance department to make sure that these numbers align and what they're seeing. And so I think some of that impact isn't necessarily just from someone who, just for outstanding bills or accounts receivable. It could be more long-term impact that we're looking at on the economy. It could be from loss of businesses that close that don't reopen. Just, I think, a broader look at the impact to the economy over the next 6 years. And again, working with their financial advisors, I know Jason Moen, we're close with them. He might be able to explain some of the details of those conversations. But we wanted to make sure that our plan aligned with what the other financial teams were seeing and projecting as kind of the long term, or when does the economy begin to ramp back up and at what magnitude and what is the cost over that time. So I think that hopefully that answers your question a little bit of what that's made up of, but it's not just directly accounts receivable. People owe money. It's more about lost revenue through a sluggish economy or a downturn.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. It definitely helps to clarify a bit. But I guess the second part to that question was, are you still exploring to utilize the ARP resources that will be coming to us to in any manner that you're able to?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia. So again, absolutely, we stay engaged in those conversations. Right now, I believe the direction, the position that utilities is given is that there are resources available to our customer base. So as far as I understand right now, I may not have direct access to that funding where the customer base may be able to apply for assistance. Whether it's through affordable housing or economic development, we are working with those teams. And if it is resources available to our customer base, that we're making that information available and working with them. But as far as I understand now, a customer would have access to that emergency like Recovery Act funding, and not necessarily the utility directly.
Okay. I think this probably is good reason for a further conversation offline, because ARP funding can be used for more than just the support to our constituents that are behind on their utility bill. So I'd like for you to, we'll continue this conversation offline, because I'd like for you to know about the resources that will be available and how your department might be able to utilize them.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
No other questions, Mr. Chair. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Counselor. Anybody else? All right, go ahead and continue, Jason.
Very well, thank you. So we had a lot to say about the water division, and that will stand in stark contrast to what we're about to see with the wastewater division, which is a whole lot of not much. Last year's forecast was for 0% rate increases for the foreseeable future, and nothing has changed between now and then. We did have a couple of things that entered into our thinking. The capital improvements plan did increase over that 6 years by about $8 million. We do believe that there will be a lingering COVID impact on the revenues, something like 2.3 million over that 6 years, something similar to what we see with water. But really, what we see is a whole lot of not much change. This is the operating cost projection. As you can see, it's almost identical to the previous year. The capital improvements, just really kind of some shifting there. There was some additions, like I mentioned, but a little bit of shifting in terms of the timing. None of this had any impact at all on the rates. Obviously, we're still at 0. Going to do some, the debt we plan to issue is coming a little bit later in the plan than what we had initially thought. And of course, that leads to a difference in how the debt service comes back at us here. So our coverage still remains very strong every year. Our cash reserves are very, very strong. Part of this has to do with, we had shown in a few years ago, we had shown the ability for the wastewater division to take care of some big capital improvements out at the wastewater treatment plant just with its cash reserve. And I think the wisdom at the time was that because we had very historically low interest rates and the ability to go get the green bonds, that that project at the treatment plant was very well suited to make good use of that opportunity. So what happened was we didn't use the cash reserve that was there. We instead borrowed the money. So now we do have the cash on hand in order to do these things. I still think that we still have rates that are at all-time lows, and making use of debt, if we can, is probably still the best choice. That's what we've modeled anyway. We don't necessarily have to do it that way, but that's what we've assumed for the time being. Revenue requirements, modest, very small changes that didn't actually cause any kind of change at all in the need for rate increases. So very quickly through the wastewater division, not a whole lot of changes. We can just keep the rate increases down and at zero. We want to secure some bonding for this nutrient removal project that takes place in fiscal year 2024. And otherwise, we're in good shape with no impacts there for wastewater. And that really wraps it for wastewater. If you have any questions, I'll pause here before we go to environmental services.
Thank you, Jason. Any questions for wastewater? All right, go ahead and continue, Jason.
All right, environmental services, there's a lot going on with our environmental services division. I'm sure most of you are aware that there's going to be some changes with the landfill costs, and that's one of the major drivers in our analysis here tonight. So we did look at a few different scenarios here, kind of like we did for the water division. We've got a couple of big drivers. The landfill certainly being one of them. We do also have a maintenance building that's scheduled for construction now. It's about a $10 million project. And we also have ongoing need for vehicle replacement. And when we say vehicle replacement, we're generally not talking about pickup trucks and cars. We're talking about big, heavy equipment that needs to be replaced pretty regularly, about $2.5 million a year worth of vehicle replacements. So with all of this in the air, we know that with the environmental service division, we're going to need to do something. And then it kind of comes down to choices that you would like for how you do that something. So we looked at doing an upfront increase. This is sort of the rip the Band-Aid off approach, do 12.5% really this coming year, and then it's good after that. Another approach would be to go every other year towards these increases, which would be about 7.25% every other year. And in this third scenario, it's just over 4% a year. And I'm going to get in a little more detail about what's driving all of this, but like I said, it's the landfill, it's the fund, vehicle replacements, and of course the maintenance facility. And there they are. So the shop building is $9.8 million additional to the 6 years from our last year's forecast. The landfill tipping fee is going to add $8.4 million over that 6 years. And we do think that there'll be some COVID impacts, although not as big as what we saw in water and sewer, about $1 million there. So about $19 million in additional costs to contend with. One of the big things is on the operating costs. This is where the landfill fees and landfill costs make their way into our analysis. So you can see the impact that that's expected to have for the next 5 or 6 years. The capital program. So when we looked at this last year, for whatever reason, last year, we were of the belief that this project, the maintenance shop, was near completion or had been started at least. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And so we had this very low forecast of capital projects last year, whereas the reality looks a lot more like this. So it was a big miss. I still don't quite know how that got missed, but it surely wasn't for lack of looking. We have repaired that. Here's the forecast now. We believe that the approach towards the maintenance facility will be, again, to issue bonds for the costs. And so what was going on with environmental services was there was a little bit of existing debt that was going to be extinguished by basically this coming fiscal year. That really leaves some headroom to issue some more bonds. We're looking at about 11.8 million. It would be issued in 21-22. It would pay for the capital improvements projects, including some of the vehicle replacements. And then it would start getting paid off. So the balance will decline from that point going forward unless there's more bonds issued. The annual debt service payments currently 1.4 million. With the new debt, it would go up to 2.2. Environmental services, debt service coverage. This all looks pretty promising. Once we get the some of those existing bonds paid off, we should have very high coverage on the debt. Fund balance is in good shape. We're going to need that fund balance to take care of. Mostly what we want to use it for is to catch up on the vehicle replacements. So delaying the new shop building project, and I say delayed because of where we had it last year versus this year, and the expected bond issuance, that's going to drive cash reserves higher up here in the front. So we're going to issue the bonds here. That actually hits our cash and it spikes it up here, but then we draw it down very quickly as we build that shop and take care of those capital improvements projects. And we'll draw that down. We expect to draw this down right towards our target here, which is sitting at right at $7.8 million in reserves. Total revenue requirements really being pushed mostly by those changes in operating costs, the landfill, and a little bit with debt service. You can see that we had an increased cost there for the debt service. But this is what that looks like. So currently, kind of sitting at this $12 million range for the revenue required. And as we move out into the future, we're going to be growing that all the way from here, 12 million, all the way up to about 16 million. Like we did for the water division, we tried to break this forecast out into a few areas just to add some additional insight for you. The pink area is still the core operations and maintenance for the division. This gold area is the other city services, which we're calling general fund expenses. And then this green area is capital needs. Just to make sure everyone's aware, there's no franchise fee with either the wastewater division or the environmental services division. It only exists in the water division. So with the environmental services division, landfill and processing, the landfill processing fees, they're expected to go from 2.5 to 4.7 million over this forecast, increase of 84%. The new shop building, that total will come to just under 10 million. That's what we're planning on right now. We're going to have some rate increases to cover these costs. We just didn't see any other way to do this. We pulled some debt into this. We looked at different ways of funding all of this. Some level of rate increase is unfortunately unavoidable for the environmental services division. So, how you want to do that is sort of the key. We're looking for your feedback on that this evening, because I don't think we have necessarily a proposed or preferred approach. I'll double back in my presentation for a second to show you what I'm talking about again. These were the approaches. So, rip the Band-Aid off at the 12.5%, basically now. Or we could stagger it every other year at 7.25%. We could do something that's annual at 4.25% per year. What's the preference? I think that's what we're asking of you tonight. So I do have an update on one of the issues that we've been tracking with you for the last few years that relates to some of the cash balances. But before I go to that, why don't I pause for questions about environmental services?
Any questions from committee members on ESD?
I have a question, Chair. Councilor Lindell here.
Go ahead, Councilor Lindell.
Thank you. On that new shop building at 9.8 million, what are we currently using?
I'm sorry, using for the shop building? Is that the question?
Yes.
I see.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell. So currently at Silo Yard, There is a one bay maintenance shop that is being used. That ultimately, really, it's hard to get one of the garbage trucks to fit in there. But it only does one truck at a time. So that's currently what we're doing. Anything other being done is being done outside on the ground.
So how many bays is this proposed new shop building?
All right. I believe that Shirlene may be available. If my memory serves me, I believe it is 3 bays.
Hi, Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell. We will be bringing the details for the shop in a separate presentation, but we're looking at a 6-bay shop.
Okay, I guess we'll take a look at that and see how that budget's in. 10 million on a new shop actually seems, not that I have any exact reference point on it, but that seems like a lot of money for a new shop. I don't know if that's all the equipment and everything else, but if we have 1 bay now, and then we're going to 6, that's a pretty sizable increase. So I think that's something that I want to have more information on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Anybody else? All right, I can't see anybody because of the presentation, or everybody. So if you have a question, please just speak up.
So I should probably add here that you'll hear a lot more about the Environmental Services Division in the coming weeks, because this, as I mentioned at the onset of our presentation, every year, in addition to this update that we do on the 5-year forecasts, we also do a deep dive into one of the divisions to look at the costs of service and how that compares to the rates that are being charged for the different classes of service. For this reporting period here, in other words, this last fiscal year, we were looking at the Environmental Services Division, and I have a team of individuals who are going to be bringing you those recommendations separately from this, but they're all based on the same revenue requirements that I just went over with you. So all of the costs and everything that you've seen tonight, those will be part of that presentation as well. But there will also be a lot of additional data and additional details there about, for instance, how much does it cost to do roll-off service versus residential service and so forth. There'll be some recommendations on rate structures that we don't have here tonight because they're best done in that other presentation. And to answer the counselor's question, I think you'll have more information there too about some of the projects that are going on in the division and what the timing and schedule is for them.
All right, so instead of looking for input tonight, I would recommend that we just do those later presentations and then get feedback from counselors at that point.
Very well. I want to update, before I wrap up, I wanted to update you on an issue that I know you've been tracking on, and I know I've been tracking on it and reporting back to you for some years. This has to do with what we've affectionately called the administrative cash redistribution, which is to try to explain the situation for those who aren't aware of it. Utilities as a department has a group of funds that we call the administrative funds, and these funds take care of things like customer billing and related services that the utilities department shares with all the divisions. So what happened over time was the way that group of accounts gets funded is they post a budget. The utility divisions then provide funding for that budget. But what then happened was, like most of the funds in the utilities, is the actual spending from one year to the next was less than what the budgeted request was. And so over time, there was an accumulation of cash in these accounts. When we brought this to the attention of the the department, to Shannon, and then to the city council, the number was sitting at just under $10 million. I believe it was $9.5 million had accumulated into these funds. And our recommendation was that those funds be redistributed to the divisions so that those funds could be used for capital projects, so that we didn't have to raise rates or do anything like that in order to get the funds needed to pay for the capital projects. So it's taken some time to get this done, but my report to you tonight is it's our understanding, and based on everything we've seen, that it has been accomplished. It's been done. The funds have been redistributed to the utility divisions. I think there's still some questions about how it was redistributed, and there might need to be some true ups that take place to make sure that that happened equitably. However, it's been done. I think that we've got that one wrapped up, and I wanted to report that to you tonight. That's all I have.
Thank you, Jason. Any follow-up questions from the committee? All right, so Shannon, moving forward, I think, split them apart. So if ESD has specific ideas or recommendations, that we bring those forward separately, and that we have separate discussions on each of those with the recommendations from Charlene and others moving forward. You okay with that?
Yes, sir. And like Jason alluded to, the cost of service study and the actual recommendation for rate increases is what ESD is working on as we're finalizing or watching Swama kind of finalize their process.
All right, you did get a little bit of direction that maybe a 6-bay maintenance shop may be a little bit excessive, but I assume you guys will talk about it and decide what's appropriate and make a presentation that either supports that or doesn't.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate the presentation. Let's move on to the action items on our consent calendar. First is item A, a resolution establishing an operation plan for bicentennial pool for the 2021 season. Councilor Garcia, you pull this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just first, I guess for clarification, I took a look at the action sheet, and it looks like if it was, according to the action sheet, passed through finance, but it's my understanding that finance, it got pulled off the agenda. So I don't know if that needs to be amended.
Ms. Wheeler, do you know? Or Mr. Rinaldi?
Thank you, Chairman, for the question. I think that actually Jamie Ray may be the best one to, Councilor Bayton. Thank you, Councilor Bayton. Go ahead.
Councilor Garcia is correct. We didn't act on it at finance because we didn't have the information on time. So we just put it off, and it'll either go back to finance or straight to council, but finance did not act. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Councilor Bayton, for clarifying that. So according to the memo, the pool is, or at least last summer, was leaking 130,000 gallons a month. So just by kind of simple math, that's roughly 400,000 gallons over last summer. And so my question is, how do we not notice when we have that much leakage? I know that if there was a constituent that was leaking 400,000 gallons, or even a tenth of that, the city would intervene in some way, shape, or form. So and I don't know who the question would be directed to, but there seems to be a breakdown in regards to tracking the water usage and giving a heads up as to the overuse of the water. So can I get a little clarification on the system? Why wasn't it caught? And if it was caught, because it's my understanding, this is a leak that we've known about for months upon time. And I don't know if we knew about it even last summer. So can I get clarification on that, please?
Yes, thank you for the question, Councilor Garcia, Chairman. I can attempt to answer it. Shannon might be able, and Christine Chavez is here too. It'd be great if she could help me out. One of the ways that the Water Conservation Office recommends that clients of the water utility monitor their water use is with the new application that can give them alerts when there's use that's over normal. We don't have that set up on the many city utility accounts, but as a result of finding out about this leak, we are working with Christine to get that set up on all the city utility accounts. City utility accounts are an interesting thing that are not really the ownership and responsibility of any particular area, but this, we agree with you completely, Councilor Garcia, that we need a much tighter management of our use of water and as well as electricity, of course, and gas, and that the facilities division is looking into setting up those alerts so that we could get an alert from the system and then open a work order right away, and then have one of the facilities maintenance people go and take a look and see if they could detect it, or at least we would become aware. But we haven't had that monitoring turned on our accounts, which is recommended. And then secondly, like you said, that the water division would detect another customer with this bad of a leak. And I think actually the way that occurs is through audits. And I believe Christine said to me, and she can clarify or add, that they're actually about to start an audit of their clients' accounts. So it's not, it isn't caught like just in the normal day-to-day, but they can do auditing, or we can set up the alert on the app, which is what we're going to do.
Okay, and I guess the last part of that kind of question was, can I get confirmation of when staff knew about the leak?
Yes, thank you so much. I think it's discussed in the memo. Apparently operating staff, the rec people thought there was a leak. It's interesting because they thought they were losing a ton of water, but actually it's less than they thought from that daily leak, from the daily amount they had to refill the pool. But unfortunately, the message didn't get to Public Works that it was a dire situation until luckily Councilor Lindell mentioned it to the mayor, and then we heard about it and we jumped in. So unfortunately, we didn't realize what the situation. That's what my understanding is. I don't know if Kira wants to add to that.
Thank you, if I may, Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia. So I don't know when rec staff knew about this, but I know that I became aware of it as soon as I came on board in early January. And rec staff had, as the memo states, had a contractor price of repair. And then as soon as I became aware of it, we communicated with Public Works. And I think that's when it got elevated to the level of being able to start to fix it.
Thanks so much, Kara. So when you came on board in January, there was already work done to work with the contractor to get a price to fix it. So that takes time. So do we have a time period of when these contractors came on board to evaluate the situation? When and who reached out to the contractor to get the work done? I mean, I'm just trying to backtrack when this all happened, because the way this is being presented is in the sense of we just found out, we just knew this, where we could have potentially known last summer. And I think the sentiment of the community is, if we knew about this going on, why didn't we act sooner? And we are acting at the 11th hour at this. So back to the question, when did we begin to work with the contractor?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, I'd have to research that question with staff. from rec. I don't have the answer right now, unless Mr. Rinaldi may, but I don't.
Chairman, Councilor Garcia, I think every year there's a certain amount of leakage. And I think this going into this last year, since they went in to the season so late because of the pandemic, they recognized that there may have been more leakage than normal. And what you generally do in operations is they started to look at for contractors to come out and see if perhaps they could take a look at the facility and help them to determine if they have a problem. One of the problems they had was that it was also right in the middle of the highest incidence of COVID, for one, and they were having a lot of trouble finding anyone to come out. I think when they found somebody to come out was in January, and that's when Public Works was notified. I know Kara was notified. I hadn't started yet, but this is what I've ascertained from folks. So it wasn't that they were, I feel, waiting till the 11th hour. I just feel like that it was an unusual time to try and find someone to come out and do it. And even now, it's been difficult trying to find, some of the people that are the masters of pools, so to speak, because one, now they're incredibly busy. But anyways, that's what I've noticed. And I mean, I feel like Regina and her team, I mean, they moved on it and brought in their experts to try to ascertain really what we were looking at and what was the scope, the depth of the problem. I mean, other than we knew we were leaking water. We didn't know where it was going. We didn't know, a lot of things. And now I think we're better prepared and we better understand. But we feel that this thing needs to, I think, be brought to you all for discussion, because it's a big issue. The scope of what we have there. It's an old pool. I mean, I was in high school. I just graduated high school at Bicentennial, but it's gone beyond its time. I mean, unfortunately we have a lot of stuff like that. And so, anyways, that's my addition. I don't know if you have any other questions regarding that.
Thank you, Mr. Rinaldi. I really appreciate the clarification, and that kind of got into a question I did have, and you brought it up in regards to knowing where the water is going. When you're losing 400,000 gallons of water, and you just said we don't know where it's going, that to me is very concerning. Have we begun to look at evaluating the entire property in this sense? I know what I'm going to propose that we do is do a thorough evaluation of the pool, but we need to evaluate the surrounding property to determine what the impact of this leakage is. What are the safety concerns potentially? Because I think those we need to do a complete overhaul of this review. So I just want to confirm we don't know where the water went. It didn't evaporate, but it leaked somewhere, and we don't know the impact of that. Am I correct?
Actually, Councilor Garcia, Chairman, we do have some ideas as we've been working on the pool. We did have safety evaluated by pool experts, because we had the same question you had. If there's all this water is going somewhere, where is it going, and has it caused any risk to safety or structural issues with the pool? And they did some evaluation, and they feel like there are not safety or structural risks as a result of the leak. The leak is most certainly going underground and seeping down. Further than that, we don't really know, but we do know it's going underground. We, in fact, fixed some leaks in the bottom of the pool that were certainly leaking down there. We believe there's leaking in the plumbing in between the mechanical room and the pools, and that's going underground. We haven't seen the daylighting of the water, so we believe it's all underground, and we believe the experts have told us that there is not a structural risk at the pool or safety risk. That's all
Okay,
we know.
thank you, Ms.
It's not very much.
I appreciate that. And if I can request a copy of that to be added to this packet, to this agenda item, I definitely believe that needs to be part of this process. And any additional evaluation that's been on this pool should be part of this agenda item. I took a look at the FIR, and the memo says it's going to cost $75,000 for some proposed fixes. And then $18,000 in the FIR. I'm assuming that was for water. But the FIR only accounts for the water, not the proposed fixes. Why the discrepancy in that?
Because we've actually already executed them. So the money is
Okay.
actually spent.
So, but still, there's still a lot of work that would need to be done, whether it's further evaluations, further fixes, whatever it may be. And to only account for the water, it's not fully telling the picture of what the cost might be to remedy the matter. And so I would like for the FIR to be fully adjusted in regards to any additional recommendations that might come out of this meeting or future meetings.
Thank you, Chair. I just would like to tell you, Councilor Garcia, the FIR really is just providing the information to the council for the decision to possibly open the pool. The decision to repair the pool is a whole different ballgame, and we are, I believe it says in the memo, we are waiting for a comprehensive quotation on a complete investigation and rehabilitation. So we don't have that price yet. That'll be a separate decision by the governing body to allocate funds for the capital project. This FIR was really just to give the governing body the information about the cost to operate the pool this summer, which would be the cost of the water loss.
Okay, so the $18,000, if we wanted open to pay for the water, that 400,000 gallons of water that we would lose. I think there's still a lot of information that I need to even make a decision on this. Again, I haven't heard any recommendations in regards to doing a thorough review of the pool. And I think this topic is just to open it. And I think that brings me to the point of, I think it's a no-brainer. Why is this coming to us? This, as I was told for the Salvador Perez situation, I think it was the city manager who told me this is an operational decision. Why isn't this an operational decision? I think it's evident that we don't want to open the pool and waste 400,000 gallons of water. We should be looking at the next steps in regards to fully evaluating what are the cost benefits to reopening the pool in the future. What are the safety risks potentially if we wanted to reopen it in the future, and have those thorough evaluations done. That way we can make the appropriate decisions on what the future of this pool may be. So with that, I'd like to make a recommendation, Mr. Chair, to go ahead and move this agenda item forward without a recommendation.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Councilor Garcia with a second from Councilor Vihel Coppler to move this forward without a recommendation. Further discussion, Councilor Vihel Coppler, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the same similar concerns about the FIR, and one of the ones that's kind of, I always take a chuckle at some of these FIRs because the consequences of not enacting legislation, and it always goes to the contrary. Well, then we just won't give the governing body an answer or something. Is, the consequences of not enacting the legislation are much bigger than what's stated here. And so I hope that we can see some real fiscal impact and analysis on these FIRs. But this isn't the first one. This is just one of many. I too have, when I first saw this, I thought, why are we getting this agenda item? Because we never get asked on things that we probably should get asked. Like, do we want to remove the obelisk from the plaza in the midnight hour? Or do we want to open Salvador Perez Pool? Or do we want to open the libraries? I mean, I find it rather interesting that we're getting asked about this, since it was clearly brought up just a minute ago that this is only to determine whether we're going to open the pool or not. Well, there's a much bigger issue here, as Mr. Rinaldi has said, and as we have come to find out. We have a sinking ship on our hands, and that is really the question now. I think it's a no-brainer, you know, close the pool. We're leaking 400,000 gallons of water. If there was a business in our city that was leaking this kind of water, what would the city do? We would probably send an enforcement officer and shut them down until they fix the leak. So I think we should shut ourselves down or talk about the real issues. And it is bigger than this. You know, for right now, should we open the pool or not? That answer is plain and simple. But of course, we have to vote on it. It's plain and simple to me. But the fact that the administration couldn't make this decision by themselves and maybe just needs a little bit more company to help them make it, you know, fine. But I think this should be the standard for all future things that are decided by the administration when there should really be a council decision on them. Secondly, I'm told we don't have enough lifeguards to staff this pool anyway. So are we really, you know, it takes 3 months to hire a lifeguard, and by then they've gone elsewhere to get a job that means more in terms of money, and they can start right away before it's time for them to go to college when they receive an answer from the city. So there's a lot of things here that play into it, including the big picture, which is, shall we demolish this pool and rebuild it, since we have spent quite a bit of money on the exterior of it, the shading, all of the other things that come with the building itself, not the pool, but the actual building, which we've spent quite a bit of money on. So maybe we should make a decision to, you know, demolish the pool and rebuild it, because there's not a lot of contractors that are willing to come in and do these minor repairs anyway, which I don't think they're minor. But so, you know, this is a good fork in the road right now where we can make some decisions about it. But absolutely letting 400,000 gallons of water escape us in a drought is not, it's not being responsible. So I think we need to hold ourselves to our own standards, that to which we'd hold other businesses in town. And so I think we should move this forward without a recommendation, but there will be plenty more to say, I suppose, at the next meeting. So that is all, that's all my comments, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Beta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regina, I guess what I'm not clear on is the memo talked about repairs that could be made. Maybe they're minor repairs. So do we have an idea of how much water would be saved as a result of those repairs, or do we not? I mean, is it still 400,000 gallons with the repairs, or would the repairs make a drastic improvement and maybe we're only talking about 50,000 gallons, which may still be, you know, too much, but I guess the memo wasn't clear about how much water would be saved by the repairs we could do now.
Thank you, Chairman. Councilor Beta. That's a great question. The reason it wasn't in there is because we don't know exactly what it will save, but estimates, what happened was there was some testing done when the pool was partially filled and it was still leaking. And that's when we found that those leaks that we could take care of. So we're estimating 20% improvement in the leak from the repairs we've done.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Beta. Any other discussion? Councilor Cassett Sanchez, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for letting me just ask a couple questions, as we didn't get to see this in finance. And thank you, Councilor Beta. That was my question as well, regarding how effective the repairs were. Also, just considering part of this discussion is what our summer recreation looks like. And the memo mentions a variety of activities and individuals who utilize this pool. And I'm curious, are the other, first of all, what would an open bicentennial pool look like if we do find that we would, assuming that not assuming, but if we had decided to open up bicentennial pool, what does that look like under our current public health orders and the restrictions that we are looking at for this summer?
Mr. Rinaldi?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, good question. I think we're still having to do the same practice, COVID safety practices, which limits the number of people who can be in there. I think our staff will still have to check temperatures, ensure that the patrons call in, register, schedule their time, and whatnot. So it's really going to have an impact on the number of people. It's not like it's been in the past where it's just wide open. And we have that in all the other pools. And we've seen a reduction in the number of patrons. Although patrons are getting used to it and adjusting to that. But at the bicentennial, you have also a lot more children that normally go. Last year was adults only. And so.
Thank you, Mr. Rinaldi. And are we looking at allowing families and children to come into any of our pools this summer?
Chairman, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, we're making that attempt in like at the GCC, and we can start moving in that direction at Salvador Pettis and Fort Marcy. How we'll do it at BC will, again, as you know, the governor's orders, the city's changing stuff. It's a moving target, and so we'll see how that is. But I would assume that we would try to do everything we can to do stuff like that, to allow children to attend.
And then, to the conversation earlier, it does seem like the minor repairs are not going to make as much of a dent in the water leakage as probably would be environmentally responsible in terms of opening the pool. How are we exploring any other options throughout the city to increase opportunities for swimming this summer, either through partnerships with other pools, if we do choose to not open BC this summer?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, we've spoken with the community college. We've looking at Country Club, and the community college has, not Country Club, excuse me, community college has a lot of capacity for extra swimming lanes, and currently should know that they don't tend to be full. But we might do a formal arrangement with them, and we're exploring that possibility as well. And so that's the one we're looking at most of all. There's a private organization that's mentioned in the memo that we may also approach for that purpose.
Thank you, Director Ochoa. And then I believe this would be a question for Ms. Wheeler. We do know that there are some major repairs needed on Bicentennial. This will be something that we'll need to be exploring further. Waiting to do those repairs, will that increase the cost of what those repairs would look like at this point? In other words, is that leak doing enough damage on a monthly basis that it would, or a daily basis, that it would increase our cost for repair as we start to look at whether or not we can save Bicentennial Pool or completely have to rehab it?
Thank you for that question, Chairman Councilor Cassett Sanchez. I believe the answer to that is no. It has, been leaking last summer. That's where we got the data, was from last summer's water records. That was not a concern of the contractors. We had about 4 contractors looking at the pool. That wasn't a concern. And we're still, like a month away from a full estimate of the reconstruction cost and the scope of that project.
And then you may not have the answer to this question either due to that reason, but does waiting to start repairs, if we were to open up Bicentennial this summer, wait till start repairs in the fall, would that in any way hinder Bicentennial being able to be opened next summer as opposed to if we were to get started sooner rather than later?
Thank you, Chairman, Councilor Cassett Sanchez. I've asked that question as well. It's the question about whether we'll be ready for next summer is still an open question under any circumstances, I believe. If we have to do a complete reconstruction, we have been talking about, what do you do right away? What can you do in the winter? And what does the sequence look like? So they'll be providing timelines as well as scope and cost with the quote.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I believe those are all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee, for allowing me to join in your meeting this evening.
Thank you, Councilor Cassett Sanchez. I had a couple of questions as well. So first of all, I agree with my colleagues. I'm not sure why this is in front of us, but the fact that it is, it gives the governing body an option. If we decided to open Bicentennial Pool, do we have the staff to keep Bicentennial and Sal Pettis open through the summer?
Mr. Chair, we do not. We would have to close one of our other pools currently, although we are in the process of hiring, and we were to gain enough staff over the course of the summer, we could open 4 pools. But as previously stated, we currently have staff to keep to operate 3 pools. So which 3 pools those are, is the question, but we currently have to shift around staff to do that.
Bicentennial typically opens at Memorial Day weekend. And when does it close?
It's been, Mr. Chair, it's been Labor Day, I believe, typically, although last year it stayed open quite a bit longer into the colder months.
So if you could hire staff and get or have the ability to open up Sal Pettis and Bicentennial, what month do you anticipate that might happen? Mr.
Chairman, members, normally we start hiring the temporary staff to staff the Bicentennial Pool at least 2.5 months to 3 months before the opening period. And we haven't been able to do that. There's not a, we just haven't been able to do that.
So this is a moot point to have this discussion, because even if we decided to open, we wouldn't be able to hire the staff in time to keep it open for a month, since it takes 3 to 4 months to hire, or 3 months to hire. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, that's correct. Essentially, we have to close another pool in order to open BC in short order.
All right. Is there any opportunity to open up the kiddie, what I call the kiddie pool, the little top pool, I guess, that's adjacent to Bicentennial Pool, and not open the pool itself?
Mr. Chair, no, because, well, we could, but then again, we'd also have to close another pool to do so for our staffing needs. Even though staffing the kiddie pool wouldn't require as many staff, we then wouldn't have enough staff to staff another open pool. So we're, just shifting the pieces around on the board.
So it has to do as much to do with staffing as it does with water loss then.
Mr. Chair, we've said, and it is true, that we have staffing to operate 3 pools. Which 3 pools they are is the question that we seek guidance on. And that's why we're bringing it forward.
All right. And then I heard somebody say that we had known that this pool was leaking for a year. So I guess my main concern, I think the community's main concern is why weren't repairs made throughout that year to be ready for the summer?
I thank you for that question. I think I might have said that when we found out about the leak in January and talked to staff, they had stories to tell about how, their regular amount they had to refill the water on a daily basis. We didn't know last summer that they felt like there was a problem, but when we investigated afterwards, they had stories to tell. What we actually did was we went to the water data to find out exactly what the leaking situation was. So we hadn't heard when they were experiencing their concerns, but we did find out about it afterwards.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion? So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion? So this is to move forward without a recommendation. Councilor Beta, did your committee have discussion on this, or was it just tabled to the next? Well, was it tabled to the next meeting, or?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, we didn't even have discussion. We just, under approval of the agenda, we held it off.
Okay. You anticipate it going back to your committee, or?
Yes, I'll actually probably pull the members of the finance committee to see if they even want to discuss it, given the information that is coming to light now, or if we just wanted to go straight to council. So I don't know if it'll be on finance committee or not.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Beta. All right, can we have a roll call vote, please, Ms. Diaz?
Councilor Garcia,
Yes.
Councilor Beta,
Yes.
Councilor Vigil Coppler,
Yes.
Councilor Lindell,
Yes.
and Chairman Rivera.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Councilor Vigil Coppler, did you have an announcement to make?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to be excused from the remainder of the meeting.
Great, thank you, Councilor Vigil Coppler.
Thank you.
All right, we're on to item F, which is approval of PSA with Kiwanis Club of Santa Fe in the amount of $60,000 per year with a total compensation not to exceed $240 over the 4-year term to plan, promote, and execute the city's Independence Day celebration. Councilor Garcia, you pull this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just got a quick question because I couldn't, as I was quickly looking through the contract, couldn't find any, I guess, stipulations in regards to what happens if we have to cancel the fireworks show. For example, now we're in extreme drought, and if that continues, I do foresee us potentially having to cancel the fireworks show, and how would that be worked out within this contract?
Councilor, if I can jump in on that before Ms. McDonald answers, but part of the state law is that even if we declare a drought and fire restrictions and put a restriction on fireworks, that we still allow a larger show, a municipal show, to happen so that people have an option instead of buying their own fireworks.
Okay, thank you. That definitely helps. That's I think no other question. Well, I guess one follow-up question, since well, it doesn't pertain to this agenda. It's probably maybe a prior contract with the Kiwanis, regarding last year's fireworks, since it was canceled for COVID, but I can reach out offline after that. No other questions. Motion to approve.
Ms. McDonald, did you have anything to add to that?
Councilor Rivera, Chairman Rivera, no, thank you for answering that question.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilor Garcia for approval.
Second, and discussion real quick, Mr. Chairman.
Second by Councilor Beta. Moving on to discussion, Councilor Beta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank Ms. McDonald for bringing this forward and actually changing. This was a show that the Boys and Girls Club used to do several years ago, and it was always a last of minute thing because it was a fiscal year was going in from June into July. July is 4th is 4 days later. And I think the fact that you're doing it now for, what is it now, 3 years, it's going to make it much easier or 4 years to actually plan the event, do a better job with planning it. And so I really appreciate you coming in and making this change. this year. I think it's gonna make it better for not only the Kiwanis Club, but also the community in general. So thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And, I'll thank the Boys and Girls Club for taking this project on for so many years and doing it with the public schools. And then when the public schools said we couldn't use Santa Fe High anymore, we were thrown into a little bit of a quandary there. And we reached out to the Kiwanis Club and they were more than willing to take it on and jumped on it. And now I'm glad to see that it's a long-term agreement with Kiwanis. They've done a great job and the event just gets better every year. So my appreciation of the Kiwanis Club, to City Parks and Rec, all the city departments that have something to do with it. So it really is a great alternative to people lighting their own fireworks and putting on their own shows. So much appreciated. Thank you, Ms. McDonald. So we have a motion and a second. No further discussion. A roll call vote, please, Ms. Diaz.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Abeyta,
Yes.
Counselor Garcia,
Yes.
and Chairman Rivera.
Yes, I don't know what you're drinking, Councilor Lindell, but it sounded good.
Motion passes.
Almost
you.
choked.
No action items or discussion, no executive session, matters from staff. Ms. Wheeler?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have any matters from staff.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
No matters from Public Utilities, Chair. Thank you.
All right, matters from the committee. Councilor Lindell?
Thank you, Chair. I would request that I be excused from the meeting on June 7th, please.
Very good. If you can note that, please, Ms. Diaz.
Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else on the committee? Councilor Garcia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Got a quick question for Shannon. I had heard that there was a water line break today in my district and had some constituents concerned about brown water coming out of the faucet. So a couple quick questions. When those incidents happen, water safe to drink? Should they boil? What should happen in those incidences where water comes out of the faucet brown?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, thank you. Great question. It is not required to, it does not issue a boil water order. So really what is happening is if it's brown water, manganese that accumulates on the inside of the pipe is released during a main break as flows change directions. It is not hazardous, but is definitely an aesthetic issue. So the recommendation is to avoid using your hot water system, but that you would flush your cold water line. So once water is restored back, when crews have repaired the leak, is just to allow, because they will flush the main line, but any brown water that resides within like the customer system and their service line, if they would just run the water and flush the cold water system, and if they can avoid using the hot water system, that'll avoid the brown water making its way into the hot water heater. If that does happen, then you would also have to flush that system. But really that should clear up within a few minutes. If not, you may wait, give it a few minutes and then try to flush it again. If they're concerned about the water, that water can be captured and used for, for plant irrigation, things like that. Again, it's not a hazardous water. It's definitely an aesthetic issue, the color and the taste. And we attribute that to manganese.
Okay, thanks so much, Shannon. Just because we were impacted at my household, but it wasn't brown, but it was, darker than I probably would like to drink. And I just checked a little bit ago and it was still a little light tan. So per your recommendation, flush it through with cold water. And I'll go ahead and take that action. Follow up to that is, do we have any type of alerting system or mechanism where we can give heads up to constituents to say, you are in an infected area where there was a water line break, please take the necessary precautions, running your cold lines, don't run hot water so it doesn't get into your water heater, that type of stuff. Do we have the capability of doing that?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, So I know that the city does have some communication avenues. I believe things like Nextdoor or honestly, probably some other communication. I know there's already some current communication that is happening about what can we do better. I think currently what happens is staff does send out a notification that there's an issue to utilities customer service, so they can field calls as they come in, answer people's questions, and to constituent services because they also field calls. And at that point, it is published to the city's website, so that information is there. So I know they're looking at some other avenues on how I think where it gets specific, it's easier to communicate to larger areas. So I think coming to the realization that over communication might be an option. Again, if one or two streets are affected, how do you notify just one street? If it's construction, right, a couple days notice, right, we can go through and knock on doors. But when something happens as rapidly as a main break, I think the challenge is how do you target a specific area and really know who's affected by that break? So it may be an over communication issue.
Okay. That's good to know. And I think I agree with you. It's better to over communicate and pump it out through social media, ask people to spread the word, that type of stuff. Because we do want to ensure people are well aware of the issue that was had, because we'd hate for folks to not be aware in that sense. But thank you, Shannon. I really appreciate the clarification. No other questions or matters, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor. On that point, Shannon, can you check with our emergency manager and see if the reverse 911 system is still operational? I know, you could take from the actual water leak and do a 2-mile radius or a 1-mile radius around the leak and be able to do the reverse 911 system to alert people. But it's been a while since I've heard about it or even heard about it being used. So can you check with them, see if it's still operational and functional?
Yes, sir. I will get that. I'll get that done.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That's all I had. With that, our next meeting is Monday, June 7th. Thank you all. With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman.